Well, hello, everybody. This is Brett Norman. Welcome to my channel. Today is October 5th, 2017, and this marks the sixth recording in a row that I've done in 6 consecutive days to mark the 500th coming anniversary of Martin Luther's protest against the Little Horn of Daniel, the biblical AntiChrist of the Bible, the whore of the book of Revelations. Okay, so today I am going to read another couple chapters of the book of Psalms for you before we read The History of Protestantism by James Aiken Wylie, leaving where I left off, continuing where I left off from yesterday. But first, I would like to read the first couple chapters of the book of Psalms for you. So if you would like to, you can open your Bible and read along with me, or just kick back and listen. And it is worth noting that this first chapter, I would highly recommend to memorize it because I've memorized it. But I'm going to read it out of the Bible anyway, because then I won't be stuttering. Blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor standeth in the way of sinners, nor sitteth in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate both day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like a chaff, or like the chaff which the wind driveth away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knoweth the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Why do the heathen rage, and the people imagine a vain thing? The kings of the earth set themselves, and the rulers take counsel together against the Lord, against his anointed, saying, Let us break their bands asunder, let us cast away their cords from us. He that sitteth in the heavens shall laugh, the Lord shall have them in derision. Then shall he speak unto them in his wrath, and vex them in his sore displeasure. Yet I have set my king upon my holy hill of Zion. I will declare the decree. The Lord hath said unto me, Thou art my son, this day have I begotten thee. Ask me, and I shall give thee the heathen for thine inheritance, and the uttermost parts of the earth for thy possession. Thou shalt break them with a rod of iron. Thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. Be wise now, therefore, O ye kings, be instructed, ye judges of the earth. Serve the Lord with fear, and rejoice with trembling. Kiss the Son, lest he be angry, and ye perish from the way, when his wrath is kindled but a little. Blessed are all they that put their trust in him. All right. And these are a couple wonderful chapters. And I will be coming back to the book of Psalms, but there's a great number of things to consider in these chapters. And I would suggest that you take a closer look at them and think about them. consider memorizing them. I would like to learn how to memorize chapter 2 because I've memorized chapter 1, but I'll have to do that sometime. Okay, so I started the book of James Aiken Wylie, The History of Protestantism, Volume 1, Book 1, Chapters 1 and 2 yesterday, and I'm going to continue. And I just find this very fascinating book, and there's a great deal of information in this book that is of prime importance in this day and age we live in, this ecumenical day and age of the church. And the incredible lessons of history that have been obliterated here. These are very, very, very important. And we see the rise and fall of pagan Rome in this history, this early history of the church. And the use of the Emperor Constantine creating his church hierarchy, and very interesting. I'm going to go back a couple paragraphs here in chapter 2 just to catch, to make some continuity to the last chapters read. Okay, so going back to paragraphs. This disposition, that of making God less free in his gift and man less dependent in the reception of it, the desire to introduce the element of merit on the side of man and the element of condition on the side of God operated at last in opening the door for the pagan principle to creep back into the church. A change of deadly and subtle kind passed upon the worship. Instead of being the spontaneous thanksgiving and joy of the soul that no more evoked or repaid the blessings which awakened that joy than the ordures which the flowers exhale are the cause of their growth, or the or the joy that kindles in the heart of man when the sun rises let me start that sentence again. A change of deadly and subtle kind passed upon the worship. Instead of being the spontaneous thanksgiving and joy of the soul that no more evoked or repaid the blessings which awakened that joy, then the odors which the flowers exhale are the cause of their growth, or the joy that kindles in the heart of man when the sun rises is the cause of his rising. Worship, we say, from being the expression of the soul's emotion or emotions, was changed into a rite, an R-I-T-E, a rite akin to those of Jewish temples, and still more akin to those of the Greek mythology, a rite in which lay couched a certain amount of human merit and inherent efficacy that partly created, partly applied the blessings with which it stood connected. This was the moment when the pagan virus inoculated the Christian institution. This change brought a multitude of others in its train, worship being transformed into sacrifice in which was the element of expiation and purification. The, quote, teaching ministry, unquote, was, of course, converted into a, quote, sacrificing priesthood, unquote. Ooh, what a sad, sad ordeal that is. Think about that. The teaching ministry was, of course, converted into a sacrificing priesthood. When this had been done, there was no retreating. A boundary had been reached, which could not be recrossed till centuries had rolled away the transformations of a more portentous kind than any which had yet taken place had passed upon the church. Okay. So, the sacrificing priesthood. I think of the book of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 with the restrainer when I think of this. Of course, if you're familiar with that, how did that go again? I almost have it memorized, but not quite. He who now letteth will let until he be taken out of the way. I believe that's verse 7 of 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, speaking of the restrainer. So, all right. So chapter 3, we have arrived, and it is titled Development of the Papacy from the Times of Constantine to those of Hildebrand. Before opening our great theme, it may be needful to sketch the rise and development of the papacy as a politico-ecclesiastical power. The history on which we are entering, and which we must rapidly traverse, is one of the most wonderful in the world. It is scarcely possible to imagine humbler beginnings than those from which the papacy arose. It's scarcely possible to imagine humbler beginnings than those from which the papacy arose, and certainly it is not possible to imagine a loftier height than that to which it eventually climbed. He who was seen in the first century presiding as the humble pastor over a single congregation and claiming no rank above his brethren is beheld in the 12th century occupying a seat from which he looks down on all the thrones, temporal and spiritual, of Christendom. How, we ask, with amazement, was the papacy able to traverse the mighty space that divided the humble pastor from the mitred king? We traced in the foregoing chapter the decay of doctrine and manners within the church. Among the causes which contributed to the exaltation of the papacy this declination may be ranked as fundamental, seeing it opened the door for other deteriorating influences and mightily favored their operation. Instead of, quote, reaching forth to what was before, unquote, the Christian church permitted herself to be overtaken by the spirit of the ages that lay behind her. Oh, and before I forget, I would like to mention that I will put a link to the PDF in the description box if you're interested in reading along and maybe making some comments and correcting me. You're welcome to do that. I should be able to put a link. I know I did yesterday I put a link in the description box, and I'll try and do that again so that you can join me in the reading if you wish, or just download it yourself and read it for yourself. It's a very fascinating book, this book. It's a great book to study. Anyway, I'll get back to this here. I'm going to go back to the beginning of this paragraph, but first I'm going to take a short break and get some water. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. Now, I'm going to retreat the few sentences to the beginning of the second paragraph in chapter 3. We traced in the foregoing chapter the decay of doctrine and manners, within the church, among the causes which contributed to the exaltation of the papacy. This declination may be ranked as fundamental, seeing it opened the door for the other deteriorating influences and mightily favored their operation. Instead of reaching forth to what was before, instead of, quote, reaching forth to what was before, unquote, the Christian church permitted herself to be overtaken by the spirit of the ages that lay behind her. There came an aftergrowth of Jewish ritualism, of Greek philosophy, and of pagan ceremonialism and idolatry. And the consequence of this threefold action, the clergy began to be gradually changed, as already mentioned, from the, quote, teaching ministry, unquote, to a, quote, sacrificing priesthood, unquote. This made them no longer ministers or servants of their fellow Christians. They took the position of a caste, that's C-A-S-T-E, claiming to be a superior to the laity, invested with mysterious powers, the channels of grace, and the mediators of God. Thus, there arose a hierarchy assuming to mediate between God and men. The hierarchical polity was the natural concomitant, this is a different word, concomitant, concomitant. I've never seen this word before. Concomitant of the hierarchical doctrine. Okay, I got to look this word up. I'll be right back. All right, quickly looking up this word in my 1839 Webster's Dictionary. I see there is a few definitions. I will read them all. Concomitant. Accompanying, I can't say that word either. Accompanying, co-joined with, concurrent, attending. A companion, a person or thing that accompanies another or is collaterally connected. Okay. All right. The hierarchical polity was the natural concomitant of the hierarchical doctrine. Oh, that is one heck of a sentence. Ugh. That polity was so consolidated by the time that the empire became Christian and Constantine ascended the throne, and in parentheses is the year 311, that the church now stood out as a body distinct from the state, and her new organization subsequently received, in imitation of that of the empire, as stated in the previous chapter, helped still further to define and strengthen her hierarchical government. Still, the primacy of Rome was then a thing unheard of. Manifestly, the 300 fathers who assembled AD 325 at Nicaea knew nothing of it, for in their 6th and 7th canons, they expressly recognize the authority of the churches of Alexandria, Antioch, Jerusalem, and others, each within its own boundaries, even as Rome had jurisdiction within its limits, and enact that the jurisdiction and privileges of these churches shall be retained. Under Leo the Great, 440 through 461, those are years. Man, that's a long time ago. Under Leo the Great, a forward step was taken. The Church of Rome assumed the form and exercised the sway of an ecclesiastical principality, while her head, in virtue of an imperial manifesto, the year 445, of Valentinian III, which recognized the Bishop of Rome as supreme over the Western Church, affected the authority and pomp of a spiritual sovereign. Oh, man. Boy, here's that word sovereign again. Oh, how this word has been usurped. And then I see this, where was this? Leo the Great. I think of the Leonine walls of the Vatican. Weren't those under Pope Leo or something? I'm not sure. The Church of Rome assumed the form and exercised the sway of an ecclesiastical principality, while her head, in virtue of an imperial manifesto, 445, of Valentinian III, which recognized the Bishop of Rome as supreme over the Western Church, affected the authority and pomp of a spiritual sovereign. Oh, man, I think of Isaiah chapter 14 there when I see that. But anyway, I forget. I had set my alarm here. I'll be right back. All right, I'm back. I'm going to just quick read Isaiah chapter 14 just to give you a broader overview of this pomp of the O Lucifer. The only time that Lucifer occurs, the mention of him occurs, is in chapter 14 in the book of Isaiah. Only once in the Bible. I thought I'd mention that before I read this. Okay, so chapter 14 of Isaiah. For the Lord will have mercy on Jacob, and will yet choose Israel, and set them in their own land. And the strangers shall be joined with them, and they shall cleave to the house of Jacob. And the people shall take them and bring them to their place. And the house of Israel shall possess them in the land of the Lord for servants and handmaids, And they shall take them captives, whose captives they were, and they shall rule over their oppressors. And it shall come to pass in the day that the Lord shall give thee rest from thy sorrow, and from thy fear, and from the hard bondage wherein thou wast made to serve, that thou shalt take up this proverb against the king of Babylon, and say, How hath the oppressor ceased? The golden city ceased. The Lord hath broken the staff of the wicked and the scepter of the rulers. He who smote the people in wrath with a continual stroke, he that ruled the nations in an anger, is persecuted, and none hindereth. The whole earth is at rest, and is quiet. They break forth into singing. Yea, the fir trees rejoice at thee, and the cedars of Lebanon, saying, Since thou art laid down, no feller is come up against us. Hell from beneath is moved for thee to meet thee at thy coming. It stirreth up the dead for thee, even all the chief ones of the earth. It hath raised up from their thrones all the kings of the nations. All they shall speak and say unto thee, Art thou also become weak as we? Art thou become like unto us? Thy pomp is brought down to the grave, and the noise of thy vials. The worm is spread under thee, the worms cover thee. How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which did weakest the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into the heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Yet thou shalt be brought down to hell, to the sides of the pit. They that see thee shall narrowly look upon thee, and consider thee, saying, Is this the man that made the earth to tremble, that did shake kingdoms, that made the world as a wilderness, and destroyed the cities thereof, that opened not the house of his prisoners? All the kings of the nations, even all of them, lie in glory, every one in his own house. But thou art cast out of thy grave like an abominable branch, and as the raiment of those that are slain, thrust through with a sword, that go down to the stones of the pit, as a carcass trodden underfoot. Thou shalt not be joined with them in burial, because thou hast destroyed thy hand and slain thy people. The seed of evildoers shall never be renowned. Prepare the slaughter for his children, for the iniquity of their fathers, that they do not rise, nor possess the land, nor fill the face of the world with cities. For I will rise up against them, saith the Lord of hosts, and cut off from Babylon the name and remnant, and son and nephew, saith the Lord. I will make it a possession for the bittern and pools of water, and I will sweep it with the besom of destruction, saith the Lord of hosts. The Lord of hosts hath sworn, saying, Surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrians in my land, and upon my mountains, tread him under foot. Then shall his yoke depart off them, and his burden depart from their shoulders. This is the purpose that is purposed on the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched out, and who shall turn it back? In the year that King Ahaz, in the year that King Ahaz died, was this burden. Rejoice not thou, whole Palestina, because the rod of him that smote thee is broken. For out of the serpent's root shall come forth a cockatrice, and his fruit shall be a fiery flying serpent. And the firstborn of the poor shall feed, and the needy shall lay down in safety. And I will kill thy root with famine, and he shall slay thy remnant. Howl, O gate, cry, O city, thou, whole Palestina, art dissolved, for there shall come from the north a smoke, and none shall be alone in his appointed times. What shall one then answer the messengers of the nation? That the Lord hath founded Zion, and the poor of his people shall trust in it. All right, and there ends the reading of chapter 14 of Isaiah. Just was inspired to do that while I was dealing with my laundry here again tonight. So I'm getting back to the next paragraph here, and I will go back another sentence here just so we can regain our understanding of what I was just reading here a minute ago. Under Leo the Great, 440 through 461, a forward step was taken. The Church of Rome assumed the form and exercised the sway of an ecclesiastical principality, while her head, in virtue of an imperial manifesto, year 445, of Valentinian III, which recognized the Bishop of Rome as supreme over the Western Church, affected the authority and pomp of a spiritual sovereign. Still further, the ascent of the Bishop of Rome to the supremacy was silent yet powerfully aided by that mysterious and subtle influence which appeared to be indigenous to the soil on which his chair was placed. In an age when the rank of the city determined the rank of its pastor, it was natural that the Bishop of Rome should hold something of that preeminence among the clergy which Rome held among cities. Gradually, the reverence and awe with which men had regarded the old mistress of the world began to gather round the person and the chair of her bishop. It was an age of factions and strifes, and the eyes of the contending parties naturally turned to the pastor of the Tiber. They craved his advice, or they submitted their differences to his judgment. These applications the Roman bishop was carefully to register as acknowledgments of his superiority, and on fitting occasions he was not forgetful to make them the basis of new and higher claims. The Latin race, moreover, retained the practical habits for which it had so long been renowned. And while the Easterns, while the Easterns, giving way to their speculative genius, were expending their energies in controversy, the Western Church was steadily pursuing her onward path and skillfully availing herself of everything that could tend to enhance her influence and extend her jurisdiction. The removal of the seat of empire from Rome to the splendid city of Bosphorus, Constantinople, which the emperor had built with the becoming magnificence for his residence, also tended to enhance the power of the papal chair. It removed from the side of the Pope a functionary by whom he was eclipsed, and left him the first person in the old capital of the world. The emperor had departed, but the prestige of the old city, the fruit of countless victories and of ages of dominion, had not departed. The contest which had been going on for some time among the five great patriarchs, is that patriarchates? I'm not so used to saying these words, pardon me, but I don't think I've ever said this word before. Patriarchates. It would be interesting to look up that word. Hold on, I'll quick look it up. Okay, I just quick looked it up. Patriarchate is the office, dignity, or jurisdiction of a patriarch. And of course, we talked about the patriarchs in, I believe it was chapter 2, or was it chapter 1? I forget, one of the two. But we covered it yesterday. So patriarch here in the definition I have from the 1839 dictionary also says the quote-unquote father and ruler of a family. Remember, call no man father, right? From the book of Matthew. One who governs by paternal right. A learned and distinguished character among the Jews. In the Christian church, a dignitary superior to the order of an archbishop, or order of archbishop, it says here. I added the an. Okay. So, and then the second definite, there's another patriarchic, belonging to patriarchs, possessed by patriarchs, subject to a patriarch. Patriarchal cross in heraldry is that where the shaft is twice crossed, the lower arms being longer than the upper ones. Okay, enough of that. So, back to the, where was that word? Patriarchal. Forgive me, I lost my place here. Yeah, at the very bottom of the page here, sorry. The contest, which had been going on for some time among the five great patriarchates, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, Constantinople, and Rome, the question at issue being the same as that which provoked the contention among the disciples of old, quote, which was the greatest, unquote, was now restricted to the last two, Constantinople and Rome, east and west. The city on the Bosphorus was the seat of government and the abode of the emperor. This gave her patriarch powerful claims, but the city on the banks of the Tiber wielded a mysterious and potent charm over the imagination. As the heir of her who had been the possessor of all the power, of all the glory, and of all the dominion of the past, and this vast prestige enabled her patriarch to carry the day. As Rome was the one city in the earth, so her bishop was the one bishop in the church. A century and a half later, 606, year 606, this preeminence was decreed to the Roman bishop in an imperial edict of Phocas. That's Phocas. Thus, before the empire of the West fell, the Bishop of Rome had established substantially his spiritual supremacy, an influence of a manifold kind, of which not the least part was the prestige of the city and the empire, had lifted him to this fatal preeminence. But now the time has come when the empire must fall, and we expect to see that supremacy which had so largely helped to build up fall with it. But no, the wave of barbarism which rolled in from the north, overwhelming society and sweeping away the empire, broke harmlessly at the feet of the Bishop of Rome. The shocks that overturned dynasties and blotted out nationalities left his power untouched, his seat unshaken. Nay, it was at that very hour when the society was perishing. When society was perishing around him, that the Bishop of Rome laid anew the foundations of his power, and placed them where they might remain immovable for all time. He now cast himself on a far stronger element than any the revolution had swept away. He now claimed to be the successor of Peter, the Prince of the Apostles, and the Vicar of Christ. The canons of councils and recorded in Harduin, I don't think I pronounced that right. Harduin, Hardouin, show a stream of decisions from Pope Celestine in the middle of the 5th century to Pope Boniface II in the middle of the 6th century, claiming directly or indirectly this august prerogative. When the Bishop of Rome placed his chair with all the prerogatives and dignities vested in it upon this ground, he stood no longer upon a merely imperial foundation. Henceforward, he held neither of Caesar nor of Rome. He held immediately of heaven. What one emperor had given, another emperor might take away. It did not suit the Pope to hold his office by so uncertain a tenor. He made haste, therefore, to place his supremacy where no future decree of emperor, no lapse of years, and no coming revolution could overturn it. He claimed to rest it upon a divine foundation. He claimed to be not merely the chief of bishops and the first of patriarchs, but the vicar of the Most High God. With the assertion of this dogma, the system of the papacy was completed essentially and doctrinally, but not as yet practically. It had to wait the full development of the idea of vicarship, which was not till the days of Gregory the Seventh. But here we have the embryonic seed of the vicarship. I'm going to repeat that sentence. But here we have the embryonic seed, the vicarship, namely out of which the vast structure of the papacy has sprung. This it is that plants a at the center of the system a pseudo-divine jurisdiction, and places the Pope above all bishops, with their flocks above all kings, with their subjects. This it is that gives the Pope two swords, that it is that gives him three crowns. The day when this dogma was proclaimed was the true birthday of the popedom. The Bishop of Rome had till now sat in the seat of Caesar. Henceforward, he was to sit in the seat of God. From this time, the growth of the popedom was rapid indeed. The state of society favored its development. Night had descended upon the world from the north, and in the universal barbarism, the more prodigious any pretensions were, the more likely they to find both belief and submission. The Goths, on arriving in their new settlements, beheld a religion which was served by magnificent cathedrals, imposing rites, and wealthy and powerful prelates, presided over by a chief priest, in whose reputed sanctity and ghostly authority they found again their own chief druid. These rude warriors, who had overturned the throne of the Caesars, bowed down before the chair of the popes. The evangelization of these tribes was a task of easy accomplishment. The Catholic faith, quote unquote, which they began to exchange for their paganism or Arianism, consisted chiefly in their being able to recite the names of the objects of their worship, which they were left to adore with much the same rites as they had practiced in their native forests. They did not much concern themselves with the study of Christian doctrine. They did not much concern themselves with the study of Christian doctrine or the practice of Christian virtue. The age furnished but few manuals of the one, and then fewer models of the other, and still fewer models of the other. I'm going to repeat that sentence because it was a little different. These words, I'm just not used to the words the way they're used. The age furnished but a few manuals of the one, and still fewer models of the other. The first of the Gothic princes to enter Roman communion was Clovis, king of the Franks, in fulfillment of a vow which he had made on the field of Talabac, where he vanquished the Alemanni. Clovis was a baptized, where he vanquished the Alemanni. Clovis was baptized in the Cathedral of Rheims, 496, with every circumstance of solemnity which could impress a sense of the awfulness of the rite, that's R-I-T-E, on the minds of its rude proselytes. 3,000 of his warlike subjects were baptized along with him. The Pope styled him, quote, the eldest son of the Church, unquote, a title which was regularly adopted by all the subsequent kings of France. When Clovis ascended from the baptismal font, he was the only as well as the eldest son of the church, for he alone of all the new chiefs that now governed the West had as yet submitted to the baptismal rite, R-I-T-E. The threshold once crossed, others were not slow to follow. Okay, so let me repeat that. The threshold once crossed, others were not slow to follow. In the next century, the 6th, the Burgundians of southern Gaul, the Visigoths of Spain, the Sevui of Portugal, that's S-U-E-V-I, Sevui of Portugal, and the Anglo-Saxons of Britain entered the Pale of Rome. In the 7th century, the disposition in the 7th century, the disposition was still growing among the princes of Western Europe to submit themselves and refer their disputes to the pontiff as their spiritual father. National assemblies were held twice a year under the sanction of the bishops. The prelates made use of these gatherings to procure enactments favorable to the propagation of the faith as held by Rome. These assemblies were first encouraged, then enjoined by the Pope, who came in this way to be regarded as a sort of, quote, father, unquote, or procurator of the states of the West. Accordingly, we find Sigismund, king of Burgundy, ordering 554, that's the year 554, that an assembly should be held for the future on the 6th of September every year, quote, at which time the ecclesiastics are not so much engrossed with the worldly cares of husbandry, unquote. The ecclesiastical conquest of Germany was in this century completed, and thus the spiritual dominions of the Pope were still farther extended. The 8th century, there came a moment of supreme peril to Rome. At almost one and the same time, she was menaced by two dangers, which threatened to sweep her out of existence, but which, in their issue, contributed to strengthen her dominion. On the west, the victorious Saracens, having crossed the Pyrenees and overrun the south of France, were watering their steeds at the Loire, that's L-O-I-R-E, and threatening to descend upon Italy and plant the crescent in the room of the cross. On the north, the Lombards, who, under Albion, had established themselves in central Italy 2 centuries before, had burst the barrier of the Apennines, and were brandishing their swords at the gates of Rome. They were on the point of replacing Catholic orthodoxy with the creed of Arianism. Having taken advantage of the iconoclast disputes to throw off the imperial yoke, the Pope could expect no aid from the Emperor of Constantinople. He turned his eyes to France. The prompt and powerful interposition of the Frankish arms saved the papal chair. now in the extreme jeopardy. He turned his eyes to France. The prompt and powerful interposition of the Frankish arms saved the papal chair, now in extreme jeopardy. The intrepid Charles Martel drove back the Saracens, year 732, and Pepin, the mayor of the palace, son of Charles Martel, who had just seized the throne and needed the papal sanction to color his usurpation, with the equal promptitude hastened to the Pope's help, Stephen II, against the Lombards in the year 754. Having vanquished them, he placed the keys of their towns upon the altar of St. Peter, and so laid the first foundation of the Pope's temporal sovereignty. The yet more illustrious son of Pepin, Charlemagne, had to repeat this service in the Pope's behalf. The Lombards, becoming again troublesome, Charlemagne subdued them a second time. After his campaign, he visited Rome in the year 774. The youth of the city, bearing olive and palm branches, met him at the gates. The Pope and the clergy received him in the vestibule of St. Peter's, and entering, quote, into the sepulchre where the bones of the apostles lie, unquote, he finally ceded to the pontiff the territories of the conquered tribes. It was in this way that Peter obtained his, quote, patrimony, unquote. The church, her dowry, and the Pope his triple crown. The Pope had now attained two of the three grades of power that constitute his stupendous dignity. He had made himself a bishop of bishops, head of the church, and had become a crowned monarch. Did this content him? No. He said, quote, I will ascend the sides of the mount. I will plant my throne above the stars. I will be as God, unquote. Not content with being a bishop of bishops and so governing the whole spiritual affairs of Christendom, he aimed at becoming a king of kings, and so of governing the whole temporal affairs of the world. He aspired to supremacy, sole, absolute, and unlimited. This alone was wanting to complete that colossal fabric of power, the popedom, and towards this the pontiff now began to strive. Some of the arts had recourse in order to grasp the coveted dignity whereof an extraordinary kind, An astounding document purporting to have been written in the 4th century, although unheard of till now, was in the year 776, brought out of the darkness in which it had been so long suffered to remain. It was the, quote, donation, unquote, or testament of the Emperor Constantine. Constantine says the legend found Sylvester in one of the monasteries on Mount Sorcat, having mounted him a mule, and he took hold of his bridle rein, and walking all the way on foot, the emperor conducted Sylvester to Rome and placed him upon the papal throne. But this was as nothing compared with the vast and splendid inheritance which Constantine conferred on him. as the following quotation from the gift, as the following quotation from the deed of gift to which we have referred will show, quote, "We attribute to the see of Peter all the dignity, all the glory, all the authority of the imperial power. Furthermore, we give to Sylvester and to his successor our place of the Lateran, which is incontestably the finest palace on the earth. We give him our crown, our mitre, our diadem, and all our imperial vestments. We transfer to him the imperial dignity. We bestow the holy pontiff in the free gift the city of Rome and all the western cities of Italy. To cede precedence to him, we divest ourselves of the authority over all those provinces, and we withdraw from Rome, transferring the seat of our empire to Byzantium, inasmuch as it is not proper that an earthly emperor should preserve the least authority where God hath established the head of his religion." Unquote. A rare piece of modesty, this on the part of the popes, to keep this invaluable document beside them for 400 years and never say a word about it. And equally admirable the policy of selecting the darkness of the 8th century as the fittest time for its publication. To quote it is to refute it. It was probably forged a little before AD 754. It was composed to repel the Longobards, that's a different name, on the one side and the Greeks on the other, and to influence the mind of Pepin. In it, Constantine is made to speak in the Latin of the 8th century and to address Bishop Sylvester as Prince of the Apostles, Vicar of Christ, and as having authority over the four great thrones, not yet set up, of Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, and Constantinople. It was probably written by a priest of the Lateran Church, and it gained its object, that is, it led Pepin to bestow on the Pope the exarchate of Ravenna, with 20 towns to furnish oil for the lamps in the Roman churches. During more than 600 years, Rome impressively cited this deed of gift, inserted it in her codes, permitted none to question its genuineness, and burned those who refused to believe it. The first dawn of light in the 16th century sufficed to discover the cheat. In the following century, another document of a like extraordinary character was given to the world. We refer to the, quote, decretals of Isidore, unquote. These were concocted about the year 845. I must be getting tired. They profess to be a collection of the letters, rescripts, and bulls of the early pastors of the Church of Rome. Anacculus Clement, and others down to Sylvester, the very men to whom the terms, quote, rescript, unquote, and, quote, bull, unquote, were unknown. The burden of this compilation was the pontifical supremacy which it affirmed had existed from the first age. It was the clumsiest but the most successful of all the forgeries which have emanted from what the Greeks have reproachfully termed, quote, the native home of inventions and falsifications of documents, unquote. The writer who professed to be living in the first century painted the Church of Rome in the magnificence which she attained only in the 9th, and made the pastors of the first age speak in the pompous words of the popes of the Middle Ages, abounding in absurdities, contradictions, and anachronisms, It affords a measure of the intelligence of the age that accepted its authentic. It was eagerly laid hold of by Nicholas I to prop up and extend the fabric of his power. His successors made it the arsenal from which they drew their weapons of attack against both bishops and kings. It became the foundation of the canon law and continues to be so, although there is not now a popish writer who does not acknowledge it to be a piece of imposture. Quote, never, unquote, says Father de Rion, quote, was there seen a forgery so audacious, so extensive, so solemn, so preserving, unquote. Yet the discovery of the fraud has not shaken the system. The learned Dupin supposes that these decretals were fabricated by Benedict, a deacon of Mainz, who was the first to publish them, and that to give them greater currency he prefixed to them the name of Isidore, a bishop who flourished in Seville in the 7th century, quote, without the pseudo-Isidore, unquote, says Janus, quote, there could have been no Gregory VII. The Isidorian forgeries were the broad foundation which the Gregorians built upon, unquote. All the while, the papacy was working on another line for the emancipation of its chief from interference and control, whether on the side of the people or on the side of the kings. In early times, the bishops were elected by the people, and by they came to be elected by the clergy with consent of the people, but gradually the people were excluded from all share in the matter, first in the Eastern Church and then in the Western, although traces of popular election are found at Milan so late as the 11th century. The election of Bishop of Rome in the early times was in no way different from that of the other bishops, that is, he was chosen by the people. Next, the consent of the emperor came to be necessary to the validity of the popular choice. Then the emperor alone elected the pope. Next, the cardinals claimed a voice in the matter. They elected and presented the object of their choice to the emperor for confirmation. Last of all, the cardinals took the business entirely into their own hands. Thus, gradually, was the way paved for the full emancipation and absolute supremacy of the popedom. All right, and that's chapter 3. And I'm an hour and 10 minutes into my recording here. Well, hope you enjoyed it. That was History of Protestantism, first book, chapter 3. And looks like we'll continue tomorrow if that works out. And hope everyone's doing well. And thanks for stopping by and listening in. I'll catch up with you soon. Bye-bye.